Selling used furniture online has never seemed dangerous to me. I was always careful with who let them come to my house, and I usually arranged the meetings during the day in busy places. But that night, I made a mistake. A man contacted me interested in a bookshelf I was selling. He insisted on picking her up that same night, saying that he only had that time available. There was something in the way he spoke that made me uncomfortable. He seemed very anxious, as if he was more interested in coming to my house than in the furniture itself. But against my instinct, I ended up agreeing. Shortly after 10 p.m., he arrived. I was already sorry to have scheduled so late. The man was tall, wore a wide coat, and kept the hood on his head all the time. His gaze wandered through my house more than to the bookshelf he had come to pick up. He asked if I lived alone, commented that my house seemed very safe, and at one point, even asked how many rooms it had. I was uncomfortable, but I tried to keep the interaction brief. He paid in cash, helped me carry the bookshelf to the car, and, without much ceremony, left. At least, that's what I thought. After he left, I had a strange feeling, as if something was still wrong. I closed the door and, as a precaution, checked all the locks. But the restlessness didn't pass. I decided to review the images of the security cameras outside the house. When I opened the app on my phone, I felt a chill go up my spine. The man hadn't left immediately. After putting the bookshelf in the car, he stood still for a while, looking at my house. Then he started walking around, as if he was analyzing the structure. He discreetly tested the back door handle, then went through the windows, observing the interior. He stayed like this for almost an hour, wandering around the house before finally leaving. I tried to convince myself that I was exaggerating, that maybe it was just paranoia. But I couldn't sleep well that night. The thought that someone with bad intentions had been there, snooping, made me uneasy. Still, I forced myself to follow the routine the next day, trying to forget what happened. But the next morning, I was awakened by a sound that completely froze me, the click of a door being unlocked inside my own house. My heart raced. I was motionless in bed, holding my breath, trying to understand if it had been real or just a dream. But then I heard another noise, a soft creaking, as if someone was pushing a door slowly. I took the cell phone from the nightstand, opened the camera app, and went straight to the view of the back door. The blood froze in my veins. The door, which I was sure I had locked, was now ajar. My mind ran to the only possibility that made sense, the man from the night before. He should have found a way to get in. With trembling fingers, I dialed the police number and whispered the situation. While I was talking, I heard a sound coming from the corridor. Steps. Someone was inside the house. The operator asked me to stay on the line and lock myself in a safe room. I ran to the bathroom and locked the door, holding the doorknob tightly. On the outside, the steps got closer. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed deafening. I expected, at any moment, to see the handle turn. The wait was agonizing. I tried to hear any movement, but the silence was even scarier. Then, out of nowhere, a dry sound echoed through the house, as if something had been knocked down. My stomach turned. Did he know I was there? I tried to control my breathing, keeping the phone glued to my ear. The police attendant informed me that a vehicle was already on its way, but warned me not to leave where I was until the police arrived. Minutes passed, but they seemed like hours. Then, blue and red lights illuminated the slits in the bathroom window. The sound of the siren brought immediate relief, but at the same time a new wave of dread. Was the invader still there? I held the doorknob tightly and heard the police calling from outside. A few seconds later, a loud knock on the front door echoed through the house. It was at that moment that I heard something that made me freeze. Hurried steps, and then the sound of a door closing. I opened the bathroom door cautiously and tried hard to stay calm while walking to the entrance of the house. The police were outside, illuminating the balcony with flashlights. As soon as they saw me, they told me to stay where I was and started scanning. One of them went straight to the back, while another checked the windows and possible entry points. That's when the first policeman shouted something on the radio, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He found fresh footprints in the side garden. The guy had fled a few seconds before the vehicle's arrival. One of the agents came in and started asking me questions. I told everything: the strange behavior of the buyer, the time he spent wandering around my house, and the noise of the lock being unlocked. They checked the cameras again and noticed something I hadn't noticed before. At a certain moment, the man disappeared from the reach of the lenses for almost 15 minutes before reappearing and leaving. It was enough time for him to do something inside the house without me knowing. The police did a complete sweep of the house, but found no one. Still, the idea that that man could have entered without me noticing made me paranoid. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing the recordings and checking every door and window, trying to understand how he could have managed to unlock something inside. It was only the next day, when doing a more careful inspection, that I noticed something disturbing. The small basement window, which I rarely checked, was slightly open. I had never moved that window since I moved. The policeman who returned to get my testimony confirmed what I already feared. It was possible that the man had entered the house even before the first night. Maybe he hid, waiting for the right opportunity. Or maybe you planted something there, a reason to come back later. The only thing I know is that that same week, I sold the furniture through another app and changed all the locks. Since then, I've never put anything up for sale online. When I found the apartment ad, it seemed too good to be true. The rent was far below normal for the region, and from the photos the place looked impeccable. I contacted immediately and was greeted by a nice woman, who introduced herself as the owner. She said she was in a hurry to rent, that's why the price was so affordable. I went to visit him on the same day, and in fact, everything seemed perfect. Clean, furnished, and in a quiet neighborhood. I didn't hesitate and closed the deal on the spot. Deep down, I knew I should have been suspicious. In the first few days, everything went well, but soon I began to notice small, strange details. Every morning, when I left for work, I locked the door carefully. But when I got home, the lock looked different. As if someone had touched her, albeit subtly. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Maybe I was forgetting how I had left her. But after a week, the feeling that something was not right began to become unbearable. I started testing the lock every night. He locked the door, turned the key a few times, and pulled to be sure. But every time it dared, something seemed different. Sometimes, the key didn't turn as easily. Other times, I felt a slight resistance when opening the door, as if I had been locked again by someone else. That made me restless. I even thought that maybe the lock was defective, but there was something in it that just didn't seem right. That's when I decided to test something. Before leaving for work, I put a small piece of adhesive tape in the corner of the door, where no one would notice. If someone opened it, the sticker would come off. When I returned home that night, my breath was stuck in my chest. The sticker was no longer there. Someone had entered the apartment while I was away. I felt a chill running down my spine, but I decided not to do anything at that moment. Instead, I waited until the next night, when I was determined to find out what was going on. I decided to leave, but I was hiding in the dark corner of the room, with the light off and absolute silence, trying to mix with the darkness. I spent a long time waiting, almost falling asleep in an uncomfortable position. Then, almost as if time had stopped, I heard the familiar sound of the door opening slowly. The street light barely illuminated the corridor, but I could see the shadow of the silhouette. It was the owner, just like the other nights when I had felt that something was wrong, but now I could see clearly. She stood in the hallway for a long time, motionless, without making a sound, as if she was waiting for something. She didn't move or talk, she just watched the environment in a strange way, as if she was waiting for me to reveal myself or for something to happen. The tension in my throat was unbearable. I continued there, without making a sound, my heart beating hard in my chest, as if she could hear me. The air seemed dense, loaded with a feeling that something very wrong was about to happen. The woman was there, standing, as if she were in a trance, fixing her gaze on the environment, on the furniture, on the walls, as if she were looking for something or someone. My hands began to sweat, and I tried to control my breathing, trying not to make noise. Then, after a time that seemed like an eternity, she began to walk slowly, almost as if she were dragging down the corridor, her steps soft and disconcerting. But something seemed wrong. She didn't seem to be looking for something. She seemed to be waiting for me to show up. When she approached the door of my room, I could feel her presence in the living room, as if the air around her had become denser. She stopped in front of the door, and I could hear her breathing, slow and heavy. That's when I realized that she was just waiting for me, as if she knew I was there all the time. I almost froze, the dread taking over me. The woman stood still, as if she were watching the door of my room. The silence was deep, and I could hear every beat of my heart. I was about to make any move, but suddenly she turned around and started walking back to the room. The sound of his steps moving away seemed even more threatening than his presence. I waited, tense, for a few minutes, until I was sure she had left. Slowly, I left my hiding place, with my eyes fixed on the corridor door. I decided to act cautiously, and went towards the living room window to peek outside, hoping that she had left the apartment. However, when I got to the window, I saw something that made me freeze. The woman was standing on the sidewalk, staring at the building. His eyes were fixed on my apartment, as if he were waiting for me. What was going on? She didn't go out. She seemed to watch me from the outside, even after I got so close to her in the dark. When I looked back inside the apartment, an icy sensation ran down my spine. Something told me that I should never have rented that place. I walked away from the window, feeling a feeling of suffocation, as if the air inside the apartment was becoming too heavy to breathe. My mind was in total confusion, trying to understand what was happening. How did she know I was there? Why did she keep watching me on the street after entering the apartment? I was dealing with something much bigger than a simple apartment with a strange owner. Something was terribly wrong. I went back to the corridor, where the door was slightly ajar, and looked inside the room, afraid of what I could find. The only thing I knew was that night, I was no longer alone, and I would never be again. When I looked at the other rooms of the house, the feeling of being watched intensified. Not only for her, but for something else. Someone else. Suddenly, a sound coming from behind me made my blood freeze. It was as if a door was being slightly opened. My heart raced, and I turned around quickly, but I didn't see anyone. The only thing I noticed was a shadow on the wall, a figure that wasn't there before. My vision started to get blurred, and I didn't know if fear was consuming me or if I was really seeing something. Anyway, I needed to get out of that place. But when I turned to run towards the exit, I realized that the front door was locked, and I didn't have the key. My body panicked, and the feeling of claustrophobia took over. I looked around looking for a way out, anything that made me feel minimally safe. The door was definitely locked, and the key, which I was sure I had put in my pocket, now seemed to have disappeared. The apartment, which once seemed to be an advantageous opportunity, now became a prison. My eyes ran through the walls, looking for a gap. That's when I realized that the living room window was slightly open, enough for me to feel a current of cold air coming from outside. I knew I couldn't trust the owner of the apartment. She knew where I was, and worst of all, she didn't seem to care about my presence. The only thing I had left was trying to escape. The adrenaline rose quickly, and I went to the window, pulling it hard. But before I could jump, the sound of footsteps behind me made me freeze. The woman was standing in the hallway, without saying a word, just watching me with an impassive expression. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I needed to get out of there. She didn't seem threatening, but there was something in the way she watched me, as if she was waiting for me to make the next move. I looked at the window again. The door was still locked, and panic took over me. If I wasn't fast, maybe I'd be next on her list. She took a step towards me, and the sound of her breathing became more audible, heavier. Without hesitation, I threw myself out the window, almost losing my balance, but I managed to hold on to the parapet and go down quickly. When I finally touched the floor, I looked back. The window was closed again, and the light in the living room had gone out. The silence was absolute. I didn't stop to think more. I ran as fast as I could to the street, and I didn't stop until I got to my car. I stood there, with my hands shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. Why had she done that? What was going on in that apartment? But somehow, I knew I would never have answers. When I returned home, with my breath panting and my heart still racing, I couldn't sleep for days. I knew that, deep down, there was something very wrong with that place. Something that should never have entered my life. I never went back to the apartment, and when the real estate agency called me, saying that there were new rental opportunities, I couldn't help but feel a chill. Something told me that that place had already consumed me enough. At first, everything seemed perfect. I was in my first year of university, and like every student, the budget was tight. When I found the online ad, offering a shared house for a ridiculously cheap price, I was suspicious, but I decided to give it a chance. The man who lived there was extremely kind, almost grandfather, always smiling and treating me with great sympathy. On the first day, he explained to me the house rules, and the most important thing was not to enter the room at the end of the corridor. He was very clear about it, almost excessively, and that made my curiosity increase. In the first few days, I didn't pay much attention to the rule. The house was simple but nice. You and I shared the space with 2 other tenants, but none of us seemed to care much about that room. However, as the days went by, I began to hear strange things during the night. Sometimes they were light steps, other times it seemed like a whisper, as if someone was talking softly. And worst of all, at night, the persistent squeak of a swinging chair echoed through the corridors. interrupting my sleep. That bothered me, but at the same time, it seemed harmless until one night, something made me act. It was a Friday night. I had gone out to study with some friends, and when I returned home, I noticed that the lights were off. When I passed through the hallway, I took a quick look into the room and realized that the door was ajar. Something pushed me to go there. When I approached, I could see the inside of the room. It was empty, completely empty. There was no furniture, no objects, not even a window. Only 4 dirty walls and a cold and disconcerting air. I didn't know what to think. How was this possible? You had always told me that the room was out of bounds, but you had never mentioned that it was empty. So I decided to confront him. The next day after lunch, I entered the room and found him sitting in the armchair, as always. He was quieter than usual, which made me feel a sudden chill. The feeling of discomfort dominated me as I walked up to him, ready to ask what was happening. When I started to open my mouth, I realized that he was watching me in a strange way. Something was wrong. He was holding a key in his hand, the key to the bedroom door, and he looked at me as if he already knew exactly what I had done. His gaze was fixed on me, without a shred of surprise or anger. It was a look deep down, deeply tired, as if he had been waiting for that moment for a long time. Before I could ask anything, he simply said, "You should have listened to the rules, my young man. Now there's no turning back." Those words echoed in my mind as the silence in the room extended. I didn't know if what he said had some kind of implicit threat, or if it was just a normal reaction from someone older worried about breaking the rules, but something in his posture seemed distant, as if he had already faced something much heavier than simple intrusions into his space. With my heart racing, I tried to turn away from his gaze and retreat slowly, but he got up, as if anticipating my movement. I then looked again at the key in his hand. It was a simple key, but the idea that she opened the door of that empty room gave me an even more disconcerting feeling. I just wanted to understand," I said, almost out of breath. "Because the room is empty, but you told me that." He gave a light smile, almost imperceptible, and slowly approached. "The room is empty, yes. But what matters is not what's there. What matters is what has already been there." I didn't know what he meant by that, but something inside me told me that there was something more in that room than he was willing to tell. He turned around, with the key still in his hand, and showed me the door. "Go away, my young man. You've already gone too far." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about every word he had said. He was hiding something, but at the same time, a deep fear took hold of me. The fear that perhaps I was starting to understand what he meant, and the fear that the consequences of having disobeyed his only rule were worse than I imagined. The next day, I decided to leave. I didn't talk to you anymore. I didn't want to know what was going on there anymore, let alone get more involved with it. When I left the house, I heard his footsteps behind me, but I didn't look back. The feeling of being watched did not leave me, and the fear that I had invaded something much darker and more dangerous took over me until the last moment I set foot outside that house. As I walked away from the house, I realized for the last time that the key was in his hand, but the bedroom door, the forbidden door, was still there. And with her, an uncomfortable memory that, perhaps, I should never have asked.